Oh yeah, recording. I'm Heather, and I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I love Jack by Andy. Thank you for that intro. That was sweet. And thank you for asking me to come here and speak. It's funny, when she asked me to speak, I pictured, till just when I got here, the big giant crazy podium at the old meeting that I was going to be standing behind there. I've never done that before, but instead it's just this, music stand. So anyway, not as cool and a little more vulnerable. It's not as So my earliest kind of shit that I would say contributed to my later alcoholism. My parents they divorced when I was 5. And my mom just kind of decided she didn't want to be a mom anymore for a little while. So she took off and did some, I don't know what she did, but partying, I think, actually. And so we were with my dad, and I didn't, of course, as a little kid, I wanted my mom, and she eventually did come back. And a lot of that early childhood stuff, it was more like my mom would want custody of us just to get at my dad. That was very obvious later. She was always fighting for custody, but then she would never be home when we were with her. She was always out with, at the bar or with men or whatever. And so I spent my childhood seeking her approval and I just wanted her to love me, and I wanted her to want to be around me, and I wanted her to, and so that need for approval and that people-pleasing behavior carried over into my teen years, where, I was basically a chameleon to whatever, would make you like me. I acted like I didn't care what people thought of me, but I cared. That's all I cared about, actually. I wasn't a good student. I have really severe ADHD. I still have ADHD, but I've learned some, ways to manage. And so school was terrible. And anyway, so that kind of codependency, that, approval seeking and codependent stuff led me to my first husband, who's an alcoholic, because that's what codependents do. They marry alcoholics, right? So my first husband was an alcoholic. I mean, he wasn't at the time. He was on his way. And we had 2 kids together, and I eventually left that marriage because of his drinking. And I met my second husband, who's also an alcoholic, but he was a little more, he made it look more glamorous because he didn't have to drink when he got out of bed. He didn't have the DT. He just he had money. Maybe that was it. I don't know. He ran weed this was before it was decriminalized, so he made a lot of money purchasing weed from the coast and bringing it to Utah. So a lot of free time and a lot of money. And so then that's when I ended up joining ranks, because, mimosas for breakfast, Bloody Marys, whatever, you know what I mean? It didn't look like my ex-husband's, it was fancy. I ended up with this guy, and it was awesome, so awesome at first. And then eventually, the alcohol fueled insanity of that relationship. It became violent. He was always cheating on me, and I used to be a victim to that, but now I recognize that I taught him that was okay, because he would disappear for 2 days, 3 days, come home, and I wouldn't ask him, where were you? I'd be like, I'm so glad you're home. What do you want for dinner? Or whatever, So that went on for 13 years, actually. And at some point, so in 2007, I got sober October 5th, 2018. The first time I attempted to get sober was in 2007. I went to treatment, and we'd split up, right? I couldn't get sober with him, so I went to treatment, and that's where I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. They would take us to this hospital in Davis County. I've been to that meeting since, actually, and some of the same people still go to that meeting, which is kind of cool. But and so I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. This is a fun place where I can meet some cool people, and mostly men is what I was looking for. So I did meetings in men for a while, 9 months, I think. I got 9 months. And that was, obviously, that didn't work. Just if anyone's wondering, that's new. So, and one of those men, I got pregnant. Okay, I got pregnant, and the guy wanted nothing to do with the child, and I didn't, I'd already had an abortion, and I just like wasn't willing to do it again. And so I was like, well, I'm like in 8 months sober, like I'm just gonna do this thing. It's be great, I don't have a job. I live with my parents. The father of the child wants nothing to do with the child. Anyway, I go to this meeting. I'm like, whatever, 12 weeks pregnant or something. And there's Troy, that's my ex-husband. We weren't married this time yet. Sorry, I should have said that. We hadn't gotten married yet. We'd been together for like 7 years at the point we split up. And he's in treatment, and he's at this meeting, right? So he's been in treatment for like 30 days. And I tell him I'm pregnant, and he's like, oh, I'll raise the kid. So I'm like, okay, awesome. It's gonna be different this time, you guys. Like there's not, you know what I mean? We're sober. He's 30 days, I'm 9 months, like I'm like killing it. I haven't worked a single step, I don't have a sponsor. I'm just, killing it. So he agrees, so we get together. We have this child together, we get married with this child. I'm like 9 months pregnant, And by the way, I'm in September, I'm gonna marry another alcoholic. Luckily this one is sober. He's actually sitting in this room, but. So I do love to marry alcoholics. This time though, I made a better choice. He's been sober a little longer than 30 days. So we were just like on this pink fucking cloud. We're going crazy, right? We're gonna stay sober forever on just hopes and dreams. And we stopped doing AA because that's boring and we don't have time and whatever. So at about I don't even know, 18 months sober-ish, we decided to start drinking on the weekends, right? Because we're not alcoholics anymore because it's been a little while. And plus my life was good now, so why would I abuse alcohol, you guys? You know what I mean? I had this cute house in Farmington, I had a garden and chickens and, this little toddler and whatever. And, but still very chaotic. My other 2 kids were with their dad, still an alcoholic, and I hadn't really worked very hard because I was very codependently attached to Troy. So he was the most important thing in my life, right? I was more addicted to him than any substance. And so I wasn't trying to get my kids because he wasn't really supportive of that. So I was like, all right, cool, we have this other kid, So I was my kids came on the weekend sometimes, and I just wasn't really in their lives. And so unfortunately they had to be raised by an alcoholic father. And they eventually went to their grandmother's house because he couldn't do it anymore. And so at about 18 months sober, we started to start drinking, like I said, on the weekends, and then it's weekdays, and then it's, at noon, and then it's, I'm drinking all day again very quickly. And one of these, one weekend, my son went to stay with his aunt to have a sleepover, and we went to this bar that we used to go to. And we used to go in the back and do cocaine in the back. When you've had too much to drink, a little blow will help you drink longer. So this bar we hadn't been to for a long time, and we went to the back to do some cocaine, and this person offered me heroin. Now, to me, that was a crazy offer. I'm like, that is not a party drug, heroin. Really, truly, I said to her, I have seen Basketball Diaries and Trainspotting. That is, you know what I mean? Cocaine makes sense, but because I was drinking and I had no sense of anything, and once I found out you could smoke it, I was like, well, okay, I'll try that, So I did, and and it was actually Troy and this girl were trying to talk me into it. And what I didn't know at the time is that he was already dependent on heroin. And I knew something was weird with him, weirder than normal. He had become more violent, more aggressive, doing crazy things with the bank account and all this weird money shit, but I didn't know. I'd never seen it before. I'd never been around opiates. I didn't know what that looked like. And so, he was happy to have me try this drug, and, which, I'm not saying that he did that to me, but I said yes, right? But yeah, that really spoke to me. And so I won't go into everything, but just fast forward maybe 3 or 4 months, I have DCFS involvement with that little boy. And within a year and a half of making that decision, I have signed away my rights to him, and he was adopted to another family. So he was 4 years old when that happened. And that was it for me. That was it. I was never coming back from that. And so I just dove head first into that lifestyle. Very shortly after that, not even a year's time after that, I'm homeless. He's in prison. Troy's in prison. And I just became, I was a drug dealer first, and I was like really proud of myself because I've never been in the streets before. So I thought I was like very like entrepreneurial in that. I'm gonna tell you what that looked like though. I was like on a stolen BMX bike with this actual drug dealer would give me little dime bags and like make me go peddle them. So that's really what I was doing. It wasn't really like but it provided my drugs, and and also, by the way, you might have already guessed this from the bike thing, I had gotten introduced to meth in the street, so then the bike makes sense, right? And I could work long hours, you guys know. Anyway, when I didn't need any place to sleep, it was actually awesome when I got introduced to that. I was like, what? I don't have to worry about what I'm going to eat or sleeping or anything. It was great. For the streets, it was great. But that actually really changed the game for me because that's when I started committing crimes, which I'd never, before that I was maybe like a little shoplifting to feed my habit, but that's when I really was like, I need to steal cars now, and I need to like do all this writing checks and just all this crazy stuff. So that's when I started getting in trouble with the law. I guess I should mention before any of this, I have 4 DUIs before I ever did drugs. So alcohol was a problem. I don't know if I just thought I had to mention that. I have been in trouble with the law before that, but this was the first time I was like committing crimes that were more serious. Not that a DUI is not serious, sorry. But anyway, so eventually I was, what's the word I should use? I was turned out, that's the word we would use in the street. I was trafficked. I was turned into a sex worker by someone. And then I escaped from that person. I later became my own trafficker. I was a sex worker. That's how I made money. And to me, I was, at that point when I was doing that, I no longer had plans to get, up until that point, it was like, I'll get sober by my daughter's birthday, or I'll go to rehab, and I'll do this thing, and I'll do that thing. And now, I literally would look myself in the mirror and just say, you're gonna die like this. This is your life now. And I had no more plans. Because in my mind, I had crossed every boundary I'd ever set for myself. And I didn't think there was anything else, you know what I mean? And so I eventually, I'd been arrested so many times, just go to jail for this or that, and never take care of the charges and get picked up again, and, back in for the same stuff with new charges. And finally they basically put me on like I was going to go to prison, or I was going to do this program. And I'd done treatment before this, like multiple times. But I was just like, okay, and so I'm in jail, and that's kind of like on the horizon, and I had this woman that I was in jail with, and she was probably, I don't know, she was an older woman. She'd been there a long time. Like in Sully County, like 9 months is a long time in that place. It's so hateful. And so but she was always in a good mood, and she was always like, really happy to be there. And I was so annoyed by that. I was just like, how could you know what I mean, like this? But she always had her little Bible and her big book. And I had court. Oh, so no, this was before they offered me that deal. Yeah, so I was all stressed out. So I had court, and I was pacing the cell, and I'm acting crazy. And she says, well, why don't you just pray about it? And I was like, what? I literally turned to her and I said, okay, I'm going to get right on that. I'll just write a letter to Mickey Mouse and the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and we'll all get together and figure out what's going to happen for court. This meanest. And this poor woman, because this was very important to her, right? And she just looked at me. She said, well, if it's not real, then what's it going to hurt you? And it because I was like, oh, shit. So I did. I prayed. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of like winging it. And I prayed, and she gave me the big book to read, and I was just like, oh, I've read this book, which is so funny. I don't know why I said I read that book. I never read that book. But in my mind I had, because I'd been in like treatment a lot of times, so I thought like, I probably thumbed through it or something, I don't know. So I was reading it, and on page 14, Bill W. has that really like dramatic like explanation of like this thing that happened to him. And in that moment, I literally had like this really profound spiritual experience. I felt this like I started crying, like tears of joy. And I hadn't cried. I'd cried a lot of tears of like, desperation and sorrow, but not tears of joy. And I knew in that moment that I was supposed to be doing this. Like I was supposed to be, like AA was where I was supposed to go. And I wish I could say that I was like, okay. No, that was like, I took that back the next day, right? The next day. I'm like trying to trade shit with people, coffee for this, or you know what I mean? Playing some spades. I don't know. No, but I really was. But anyway, and then I have a brother who's a couple, like 3 years ahead of me on this journey, and he's an AA guy, and I was on the phone with him, and he said, I consider him like my Eskimo in a way. He brought me into this. He said some really like stuff to me that was just like, I don't know, it for whatever reason it hit in that moment. And I attribute that to the fact that I had started to pray and ask for some kind of help. And my brother, I hadn't talked to him in years. He literally had a leukemia diagnosis at 2 years sober and almost died, and I had no idea, because I was just, I knew about it, but I did not know that he literally was almost died. And so anyway, I'm on the phone with his brother, and he said to me, you always use those kids for your excuse. You always, you get out of jail, you come, like mom's back, and they are weird to you, and so then I might as well get high again. And he just said, you need to accept that they will never talk to you again and do this anyway, because it's the right thing to do. And I was like that's impossible. In my mind, I thought that was impossible, and I went back to my cell that night, and I was just moved by the thought that kids always go looking for their parents when they get older. And what do I want them to find when they do? A junkie in the street, or someone who has actually like fought for her life and is doing good things, who's doing the right thing. So that was, and so then that, like, my brother's words literally just like took me all the way, like that was it, I'm going, and I changed my whole, I've always just left jail and gone straight to the dealer's house. And I called my dad, and I asked him if he would pick me up. I had this little list. It was called the ramp plan, because at Salt Lake County Jail is this ramp that you go down when you're done. What I didn't know is that I had charges in Davis County, so I didn't get to go down the ramp. The second they rolled me out, they're like, actually, psych, you're going to a different jail. So anyway, that was God's little silly joke to keep me there a little longer. But yeah, my dad picked, so I had these two men from this meeting in Fruit Heights, Davis County, that brought a meeting into that jail. And I went to that meeting, and this cute guy, Gary, he said, you come to this meeting at noon, you come when you get out of here. So that was my plan. My dad picked me up, we went straight to that meeting, and that was just like a room full of old timers, and I needed that. I needed men that weren't gonna try to date me, or weren't gonna harass me, or weren't gonna, because I had issues with men. I either wanted to, sleep with them, or, obviously get money from them, or I was afraid. Like I was terrified of men also, So anyway, it was just like this really great meeting of old timers, and that's where I started my journey. I got a sponsor. I started, working the steps. For me, step one was no problem. I absolutely had no problem, with knowing that I literally was powerless and had complete unmanageability of my life. Like that was very easy for me to recognize that. And I also knew that like I could be sober and then still drink, you know what I mean? I did, I knew that was there. And so that's why, like in Bill's story, when he talks about that very thing, right? Like being like, no, like I'm never gonna drink again, and then being drunk, later that day, that was like, that resonated with me, because I'm like, I never understood that part of how I was, I never understood that. I had all these reasons, I was gonna lose my son, and I still drank, and I still used, and I was gonna, become homeless, or I was gonna, whatever it was. And so, step one wasn't hard for me. Step two, even though I had that great spiritual experience, I had completely like, no, that was just withdrawals or something. I don't know. Now I accept it. But it was just for a minute, I wanted to be like, no. But yeah, I could believe that something could restore me to sanity, that like I could see that you guys did not suffer from that insanity, that took you to a drink over like a lost job or I heard all these stories of people like staying sober through all these things. And so then I knew that, and so I also used the group, like that was my group of drunks was my thing, right? And that's where I felt, I'd get the truth tingles and I would feel like those really like affirming, I'd have those affirming moments. And then, like with I don't know why I keep looking over here at the traditions. Tradition 3 for me, no. Anyway, I was like referencing the traditions for the steps, like, and I kept thinking to myself, like, this is not helping me. I don't remember. Anyway, I know them, okay? I made a decision. Yeah, and luckily I had a good sponsor who was just like, look, doesn't matter. Like right now, it doesn't matter. Like and just kind of like helped me recognize things that are bigger than me, like the group of drunks. In fact, I think that was him that told me that. And so I didn't really have to worry about that. Let's just do the rest of the work. Don't worry about that right now. It'll come, And I believed that. I did. I just believed it. I was like, all right, because I was just so broken down. I was willing to do whatever was asked of me because nothing I had done to that point had worked. And I'd tried like SSRIs. I'd tried microdosing mushrooms. I'd tried reading a lot of self-help books. I tried, I've told you some of the things I've tried. So yeah, and then step 4. I love that. I love when I hear people tell new people like this is not scary, because I was terrified, and it's just because I was so ashamed of the things like the sex work. I was never going to tell anyone about that. I didn't want to tell anyone that I'd like lost a kid. I didn't want to tell anyone that I was with a man who used to beat me up, and then I'd make him dinner 5 seconds later. I was ashamed. I was ashamed of that, but I was also ashamed of the way I treated my children and my parents, and the way I lied to everyone, and just the way I showed up so shitty and stole from people and robbed people. And so I didn't want to write it down. And, and it was so magical actually for me when I finally did, because I suddenly was just like, and then when I was able to tell it to another person who just was like, yeah, anyway, that ain't no thing, And luckily my sponsor also was a sex worker. He worked on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, and he has really crazy stories, and he was able to share some of those with me and make me feel a little bit better about, what I was about to divulge. And what I found, obviously, is that like, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but what I found from that process was I was able to see step 6, I was able to see the things that like block me from God, or block me from being a good person, or block me from, being able to find my path or find my way. And, I have, and that just because in 7, I asked for those things removed does not mean that they have been removed. I have some that I'm just always like, again, or still, like, why? But as I think about, I just have to have some grace for myself and just know that I have been using these things my whole life, these character defects. So it's going to take a little time, and it's just ingrained in my person. And then step 8, I had a really cool moment, because, well, first of all, no, step 4, I'll say, so my brother and sister-in-law adopted my son. And when they adopted him, I thought, oh, awesome, this is a family adoption. I'll get to see him all the time. And I was wrong. I didn't get to see him for 6 years, because my sister-in-law was like, no, you don't. And I resented her. Oh, she was number 1 on my list. I mean, her name was like scratched into the paper, like big and crazy. And the craziest thing happened was I did that, and then I'm not lying to you. When I went to go to my part, immediately I was like, oh my God, like I'm not mad at her. I have gratitude for her, because my older 2 kids have a lot of trauma from having to see me tweak her mom, you know what I mean? Just coming in and out of their lives, and never knowing if I'm alive or dead. That little boy didn't have to have any of that. He had to have a mom and a dad, and soccer practice, and whatever they were doing. And so she could see, because I'd get sober for like 10 minutes and be like, oh, hey, why can't I see him? And luckily she was like, yeah, no, you know. And so that was like the craziest, because that grudge was like, you know, it was fuel for me. I was like, so when I was able to like actually just like that dissolve off of my back, it was just like, wow, like I can't believe this. And, you know, and then in step 8, when I make my list, I mean, she's the first one on my list, but I knew I wasn't going to make an amends to her. I wanted to wait until, my goal was to wait until I had a lot more time under my belt before I ever approached her, because, and also the thing that had changed in that time is that, in this process, is that instead of me like wanting to figure out how I could see this little boy, I no longer wanted to interrupt his life. I wanted him to stay in his little world the way it was, and without, you know, me interrupting. So that selfishness had shifted. And then, you know, with step 9, I have, with my older 2 kids, my daughter, you know, and luckily my sponsor like really slowed me down a lot, because I was feral when I got here, like feral. Like I was like trying to gnaw my own ear off, like, you know, and I was trying to fight everybody, and everyone was a suspect, and it was really bad. So luckily my sponsor like slowed me down, so that, you know what I mean? So that I wasn't sponsoring people at 9 months sober when I'm like still hearing voices or whatever. But by the time I made amends to my daughter, she was 21 at the time. We were talking, and I was doing my thing, and she like reached her hands out and like grabbed my hands, and when I got done like, you know, expressing my regret and asking her if there was anything that I, like, basically just to tell me anything that I don't know about, or do I, you know, how can I make this right? And she just said, Mom, I know you're sorry. I can tell by the way that you're living your life. And I was just like, oh my God, because I was prepared for some people be like, no, don't worry about it. And I was instructed about what to do in that case, you know. But with Daphne, it wasn't like that. She was truly had seen a transformation. Like this program was transforming me in front of her eyes. And not only was I not the person that she had as a child, but I was a totally different person, right? Like, I mean, these things that I was gaining here, I'd never had before. And like integrity and honesty and self-love and, you know, and like just if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, you know, like that kind of stuff. They'd never seen that from me in a long, long time. And so that was really powerful. My son, Owen, he was like, I had to treat him, to use the word feral again, but I had to treat him like a feral cat. Like I had to just let him like come to me. I couldn't, you know, cause he was so angry, and rightly so. He was like 12 when I just vanished, right? And then his alcoholic dad was like, you know what, you're too much, go to your grandma. So this poor kid, he just got abandonment, and he's got all this rage. And so when I made amends to him, he let me have it. And because of what I was taught in this program and the person that I was at the moment, I could allow it. I could let him tell me how I'd harmed him. And he'd never seen that from me before, because he told me how I harmed him before. He wrote me these messages when I was out. He's saying things like, I'm really grateful for you because I can smell a liar from a mile away. Like, you've taught me a lot, Mom, you know, and like, you're not my mom, because the mom that I know would never abandon her children for drugs, you know, and just and I would always be like he'd tell me something that I'd done. I'd be like, oh, well, I was drunk, or oh, I was high. That's not my fault, you know, but this time I let him tell me everything, right? And so then he knew, you know, that this was different. This was not like Mom who's throwing out empty apologies. And luckily, my sponsor also told me, do not tell them you're sorry. They've heard it, they don't want to hear it. They don't believe you, and they shouldn't. You know, they don't want to hear you're sorry. They want you to show them you're sorry. And that really resonated too for me. And the 9th step, if you haven't gotten there, please, 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 don't give up before you do that, because at least for me, that is where like the true magic happened for me. Like, I remember driving down the road one time, and I suddenly like was thinking of the 9th step promises, and I was like, it's fucking happening for me! Like I just started, and I like called my sponsor. I was like, the nights I promises are coming true. And I was just like crying and just like driving like a maniac. And it was, because there was things in there that I'm like, that's never gonna be true for me. That stuff has always been an issue for me. I've always had these insecurities and all of these, and it was, and it all did come true. And so that's, to me, so crazy here that like, there's all these like predicted promises, and I just think it's nuts that they really work. It's so nuts. Andy and I were just talking about the 10-step promises at dinner, and I just love, that's another thing I never thought that I could be placed in a position of neutrality when it comes to drugs or alcohol. Like it was never, even those times when I was like sober, like just, staying abstinent, I was like craving, the whole time. But the other thing is just that, well, I mean, the 10-step, having that tool of like, when I mess up, I fess up, is where I got integrity from, and self-esteem. It's crazy. Just being able to like look somebody in the eye and be like, I don't know why I just said that. That was a lie. Like, which was like a lot when I was new. And people are just like, wow, that's so crazy, that you would do that. You would, like, that's okay, and just like that, even if I'm like, if I'm like a dick to Andrew, maybe I'm not immediately gonna tell him I'm wrong, but I like, I try to like make it right, and sometimes stubbornness gets in the way of that, but whatever. That's another thing I love about AA is that like that perfectionism is not expected. Like I'm not expected to be perfect, as long as I just keep trying, and keep trying, right? And then on to like with step 11, like the most. So obviously, like the biggest gifts I've gotten here is self-love and relationships with my kids. But the very biggest gift I've gotten here is spirituality and a relationship with. Now it's moved beyond the group. I mean, it still is the group, but I don't even have a definition of what that is. It doesn't. I don't need it to. I don't. You know what I mean? And I just did some spiritual practices that were suggested, and I take some and I leave some, and sometimes I move on from some and I add some new stuff, and you know what I mean? And I try to meditate every morning, and I pray every single night, and I try to pray and meditate every morning. I'm not always good at that, but I always pray at night, every single night. And I try to do like inventory my day, and see where I was wrong and how I can do better, and and then like something that I wanted to do right when I got here, which was sponsor people, because I had all these great ideas and I couldn't wait to share them with you guys. But luckily, by the time it was time to sponsor people, I was like, I don't think I'm ready, which is probably, that's good, right? Because like when I was like ego-filled Heather, I was, gonna destroy some lives. But then, when I finally, it was time to sponsor, and that's been like such a gift. Like I don't always want to spend my Sundays doing that. Especially if it's like a really new person. No, just kidding. Just kidding. No, but it's always just like so magical. And I have some people doing I have one that's like doing work right now that I'm like, it's like so fun to see her life changing and her come alive and her relationship with her kids and her, her self-esteem growing and her spiritual life growing. And I just think it's so incredible that we have this, right? That I get to take all those things that I thought were these horrible detriments, and they become assets, and I get to help others with them, And the reason I talk about the sex work thing is because I hope that maybe it helps someone else, Like that's literally the reason I talk about it, or the kid stuff, or you know what I mean? Like those are hard things, and I don't ever want someone to hide in the shadows because of things like that. I want, people to feel like they can, like I'm telling this, and I'm making jokes about it, and you know what I mean? And here we are, recovering together. So I'm really grateful to be able to be here and to share with you guys. And yeah, it's always an honor for me to be able to share some experience, strength, and hope. So that's all I got.